Tom here from Learn Systems, and welcome to a special sponsored interview and technical demo. The sponsor's video is Zorus. They offer web filtering software that makes it easy for you to protect and monitor your endpoints anywhere your users work via their endpoint agent. Of note, they're not only a sponsor, they're a product we've been using for quite a while now. If you're interested in signing up for a demo or to try out their product, there's a link right in the top of the description where you can get started. This video is specifically about the engagement product and a discussion about business efficiency. There's another video on their web filtering product linked in the description down below. Welcome, Ian. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We're going to have fun today because we need to talk about Zorus engagement and the overall employee engagement, what it is, what it isn't, and why a lot of people are asking about it, which we could probably answer that right away to say remote work has probably drove the demand for this, because now if everyone's working from home, what are they doing? So where should we start with it? I guess we can define the need pretty quickly here of, with a lot of people working from home, understanding how engaged the employee is a challenge. You also don't want it to be spying on the employee. You don't want to give the impression of that, but they are using, company time, company materials. You got to understand it. So it's like the email question. You can't just use your business email for all of your personal things, and you shouldn't be using the business computer equipment given to you for non-business things. So there's some engagement tracking and things like that. And we're going to talk about how Zorus can help us with that, with an engagement tool, and kind of the bigger conversation on it. So where do we jump in on this?
So, I mean, for me, I think that the entire industry around engagement or tracking, I think that it's due for a reframing in how people think about it. Like, I always have this comparison. About 20, 30 years ago, they really started doing at stoplights and intersections cameras that be able to tell if there's a car waiting for turn left, give them a turn left signal, right? And I think that probably when it first came out, people are like, I don't want people following me. But nowadays, it would be like, I couldn't believe stopping at a stoplight that doesn't have that. Like, it would be so annoying. Like, what it's done for actually congestion is huge. And so I think that, employee tracking, it's scary. It's an idea of like, I don't want them to know that data. But when you think about like long-term for this industry, and you think about how much more efficiency that you can gain on in department level, like that's really where I think people are going to see like there's a lot of value to this. And it's not just the person, it's the use, the role utilization, and then sales. How much time are they spending in meetings? How much time are they spending in HubSpot? How much time are they spending in Salesforce? And what are they doing? And how can that become more efficient? What should a regular target be for them? And you really can't get any of those gains without it first taking that step of, okay, somebody could know, I guess, what I'm doing on a company machine. You have to start there, but the gains, there's so much to be gained in efficiency over the long term.
And this is something I'm glad you brought it there, because years ago when I worked in corporate IT, I did a lot of efficiency studies on our accounting teams and our dispatch teams for a transportation company. And studying the apps they use, I was actually able to look at it and realize, especially 20 years ago, some of this stuff that was kind of old, it's all some of those command line driven. I said, wow, they spend a lot of time in some of these menus. Why is that? And when you start digging into it from that perspective, because to them, it works fine. They don't know they're not efficient. But from my perspective, I would go, no, you spend a lot of time going and doing this, and let me write a tool. And I actually wrote this tool it was my first VB stuff I'd done using push keys. And what I did was I realized how many keystrokes they did were repetitive. Yes, I was using a keylogger on our corporate systems that went to me. So it was, completely authorized. People knew I was doing it, but we actually took the time it took to check things in, like bills of lading and things like that, which you should take about a minute or two for each one. That doesn't sound bad until you have 1,000 of them, but it took them about 10 seconds with each of these. They typed the number in and they'd click this little app that I made and would follow up all the commands after it by using copy and paste and pushing that key to all the spots it was supposed to go. And then later we actually rewrote the software to be more efficient. That took a bigger budget, but that came from watching the inefficiencies. I think that perspective is really an important one. When you think about employee engagement, you can also look at it as employee efficiency and you trying to figure out where those gaps are. People in the work some are really skilled at noticing it. Some of them just get It's a routine, man. I type the same number, 16 forms. I fill it out 16 times exactly the same way. Doesn't bother you? Nope. Turns out I'm really good at it. So
Yeah, no, I mean, and like I think about it too. Think about reactive and proactive, and
yeah,
then IT infrastructure has been essentially it was reactive the way that people would monitor anything like servers and things like computers, workstations before there was the idea of like an RMM tool. It would just be when it broke, they'd fix it or replace it. And now you can see, oh my God, the CPU spikes, RAM spikes, like all that stuff happens before it crashes and a significant amount of time before it crashes. And so if you're proactively watching a situation, then you can be able to react to it so much faster. And I think the same thing is with employees, and that you see quiet quitting and you see some of this other stuff of people who are disgruntled. They're not quitting the day they become frustrated. They're quitting after some weeks, months of being frustrated about something that's not working. And if you have data, you can then now proactively look at this and go, okay, this person changed their behavior, a month ago, and are now spending so much time in a different app. Like, what happened? Did the manager change what they needed to do, or did they like lose their way? Don't understand this. Like, the data can help you and help both parties in this type of situation. It's not just for the employer, it's also to help the employee. And that I think is something that's lost in the way people traditionally think about this vertical.
yeah, and that's why it was almost tongue in cheek. I started out as, spying because there is some feeling you have of that, but
Yeah,
it's you swing it around the other way when you think about it from an efficiency standpoint, because we all see the jokes. The person that's been at the job, at the workforce, in that position for 20 years, someone fresh out of college gets there, they're used to more modern systems. They work at an enterprise company that has archaic systems, and you get we've always done it this way. And of course, the younger generation gets incredibly frustrated going, wait a minute, this doesn't have to be 60 steps. Wait a minute, why are you printing things out and using a calculator? Did you know spreadsheets exist? Which is actually a literal thing I did starting in 1999, because that's how old I am. There were people that actually printed stuff and then manually calculated with calculators around everybody's desk when I had started, which was crazy. Like the ones that had the little ticker tape, and they would staple it to their printed Excel, which blew my mind. Like I came in and brought some efficiency to the table there. Did you guys know sum equals sum and then those rows? I thought there was some reason they were doing it. It turns out it's just because no one told them equals sum will automatically fill in the rows and on an Excel sheet. They literally, the older people there just didn't know. They've just always done it that way.
in elementary school, it said, you're not always gonna have a calculator in your pocket at all times. It's like when did teachers stop saying that?
Yeah,
I
that's a good
wonder.
question. Certainly I was told that.
I
So,
was told that.
but I mean, this allows you to look at that and be very analytical and very precise about it, because it's hard to literally look over someone's shoulder. That's not easy. Way harder if they're at home. But when you think about from even your internal office employees, looking at where they spend their time. Why do you spend so much time in HubSpot? Is HubSpot a challenge for you? Can we build an automation around something you do to make your job easier? These are some really important factors that need to be considered. And it's the way companies in the big picture win or lose is how efficiency is. Technology from the industrial revolution till today, that's the driver. That compounded efficiency you get out of there is what the competitive advantage is. You look at companies that maybe lasted a long time, but you almost always point to some technology they didn't invest in. Blockbuster didn't become Netflix because they were behind this. They just, didn't put the effort into the streaming. They actually had a streaming service. They didn't do it, but there was some efficiencies that were overlooked in technology that allowed the next companies to innovate on that. And I think that's where, from a business standpoint of using this, it's not just making less aggravation for especially the younger workforce who may be more tech savvy than the existing workforce is there, but it's also looking at ways you can be more efficient as a business, which has a dramatic cost saving, and freeing people up to do things like maybe talk to other people, especially the salespeople. And you say HubSpot, like, do you spend time looking and reading, or do you actually spend time engaging and talking to someone?
Right, right. And I think that, in this rapid movement because of COVID, this rapid movement to, work from home, I think that there's a lot of things that management, is just catching up on like how to efficiently manage a workforce that's hybrid or remote. And that is that, sometimes they'll over meeting with people. They'll do, one-on-ones with everybody multiple times a week. They'll be kept checking in because they in their head are like, I'm worried that the leash is too long and they're not, it's staying on task. They're not doing what they need to do. But you run a software like this and you go, how could they ever do their job if they're in meetings 80% of their week? I mean,
Yeah.
it's wild. In the internal meetings, when it's an external facing employee like sales or support, and they're in internal meetings, I mean, that's where data will set you free. Data will improve your processes. And with data, you can now sort of face these challenges without directly talking to the employee and wasting their time, because you have to talk to nowadays, you have to talk to the employee and say, hey, what are you spending your time in? What are you doing? What are you doing on your day? Like, that can be frustrating for the employee. And it's also, you're using up their time asking them constantly about that. Whereas now you have the data and you don't need to directly interface with them on every question about where are they? What are they doing? Or how could things be more efficient in their job?
And you're also making this very concise and data driven. I think that's important. These aren't feelings like I feel like you spent a lot of time in a meeting or I felt like you spent a lot of time on that spreadsheet. This is a data driven tool to have a conversation with. And I think that's really important because it's not, just kind of this or that. It's not subjective or anything like that. It's very like precise. And I always like to have better conversations around a more precise and analytical tool. So we're on the same page. You're not going to argue with the numbers. The numbers are what they are. If you think the numbers are flawed in some way, maybe it's a different discussion, but they're not likely to be. So I think it puts us off on the right foot of a very clear, task oriented, like these are the numbers. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about what we can do to make this more efficient.
And when you get the numbers, the next thing that you get is a baseline and an idea of like, how long should you be spending, or with a team, a sales team, across all of your members on a team, how long are they spending in these apps? And that on the other side is employees are getting burnt out left, right, and center working from home because they don't stop working.
Yeah.
They don't know. Like internally, it's just, before at the office, it was clock out, you're done. But now they're like, well, I'm doing a few things in the middle of my day. So I clock out later, I start earlier, I'm not commuting. Having a baseline where it's like, okay, I spend 4 hours in HubSpot doing this, and you hit that 5 hour mark and go, you know what? I think maybe I'm done for the day. Like, and that's how you avoid burnout. Or your manager sees like, whoa, you're spending way longer than everybody else. Like, hey, maybe you need to take some time off. Maybe you need to step away from this. Maybe you need to, do some of these other things. And that right now, again, all that data is just completely lost because you're not tracking it.
Yep.
And that's killing both management and employees.
Absolutely. It's also making very clear, as I always value my employees' time. I don't push them at all to try to stay after unless we're dealing with cybersecurity emergencies, which are pretty, thankfully, very rare because we've got things pretty clean. But with that, it's one of those things I always remind people, even when they're beating their head against a project, there's a point of diminishing returns that I wish someone would have told me about, where just because I can work for 18 hours, I'm not efficient for a big part of that time. I'm just kind of there. I'm not.
The next day after, you're not even.
I'm not even sure what that code's going to look like the next day, but it's probably spaghetti. It's like, why did I write any of this? And it's one of those things like I just sometimes step away. But can we talk about some of what these reports might look like to give some people visual ideas?
Yeah, let me actually let me pull one up and kind of talk you through it here.
Yeah.
So this is, and again, these reports are constantly changing and evolving. This is a product that, we had built it a few years ago, but only November of last year did we re-release it with sort of this new focus around engagement. Actually, formerly was called Triton, and it was really on kind of just productivity monitoring. Now we're thinking about engagement in a more holistic way. And again, it's the trend lines that are important here. Like that's where I was talking about baselining and seeing how those trends are changing. You're thinking about where are they going, what apps are they using, and what categories are they in, and that active and idle time. And again, it's just establishing baselines and seeing kind of who's above and below, because the data doesn't tell you the story. It gives you a lead to follow on. And, that's always the way I'm thinking about it is like, I see a user out of this, most active and least active user. That's probably two people you really want to touch base with. One, Dave, it's like, hey, what are you, what are you doing? What is there something, there's a discrepancy here between the baseline and where you are. Help me understand that. And sometimes it's not a negative thing. Sometimes it's, I found a shortcut and a way to do this process so much more efficiently that it's like, great, let's share that across the team. Like that's super important. And then the most active user, that also could be a negative thing. And sometimes it's like you're really active in these applications, but you're doing things the wrong way, or you're making, you're doing something and then correcting it, or, fixing it over time. And it's sort of like, why didn't you get it right that first time? Like, what's going on? Again, data just gives you all of these leads as a manager to be able to follow up on and better understand what's happening across your team.
And this can be especially important if you have a group of people doing the same task, like their job titles are the same. And once you over time have that baseline, you may know an efficiency output because a sales guy who closes more sales, or a employee because she gets things done more efficiently when she's a threat hunter, whatever that task may be of, she's solving more tickets, he's doing this. You start looking at across those and saying, all right, here's the baseline. And if there's a big change, there's a question you might want to ask. Or if you compare them all, the employees side by side, I kind of see where you could go, well, my top performer does like all over the place. It zigzags completely different than the other three people in this particular category. Let's either make them the team lead, figure out what secrets they've done, and things like that, because they're using these differently. And that's what he said, is that over time correlation data that you get with it that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, understanding the applications that your employees are using, because we haven't talked about this, but the world has changed really significantly with the SaaS applications and the fact that SaaS applications are, essentially running the IT environment these days. Like everything has a SaaS application. Some SaaS applications are about the suite of them. Some of them are very, very focused on specific things. But in reality, what I don't see in a lot of different companies is good oversight to SaaS application usage. And that's coming. And a product like this is really key in that, because what you'll find is that you have a company Trello that 60% of your company uses, and then 20% of them use Monday.com, which you didn't even know that you purchased. Right. And that's what's interesting. What we've done as a company is, we have two products, our filtering product and our engagement product, and the two together really creates what we call adaptive internet. And that is that, if you've got a SaaS application that you want to have be essentially company wide, you can take all of the other ones that fit into that category and redirect it. So if somebody goes to Monday.com, it redirects to the company Trello. And that way, because it's impossible to tell everybody at the company about every single SaaS app. It would be a waste of time to do so, but you still want to be able to have some order there, and you want to be able to have, some way to corral this whole SaaS application world, or else, next thing you know, you could have 70, 90 SaaS applications for even just a 2,000 person company.
Yeah, and that's one of those shadow IT problems that you run into. And as a managed service provider myself, can be a challenging problem to tackle, because you don't always know, and your goal is to protect your clients, but you don't always know every SaaS application you're using or web application you're using. And the part that's sometimes overlooked from the IT standpoint is if you don't know and insert name of some SaaS app that has a breach, you're like, oh, I seen that in the news. That looks terrible. Someone took all the information out of there. Oh, my clients are using that. Ooh, it's now that can be used against them. It may have gotten their credit cards. It's you kind of need to make sure you're on top of all of that as a MSP as well. So this is good insight to have, of having that knowledge of what your people are using, because reality is we deal with a lot of younger companies now. Those companies are very different than our, what I call legacy companies. The legacy companies always have some on-prem server, on-prem stuff. Maybe that company that used to sell the on-prem stuff hosted in the cloud now, and okay, there's some connectivity that, but new startups, we've got a company with 40 locations, 0 servers, 0 dedicated cloud apps. They just buy a couple different cloud apps for what they do and have all these locations all around the US. Like, they're a very different style company because of it. No on-prem servers. Was from the day they were founded. they don't have that. So it's very different because they're not even downloading. We actually can lock down their computers really well, which is easy, but doesn't exactly solve all the problems they have because it's all SaaS apps. So that's kind of the future of a lot of companies that can operate that way.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. So I did a webinar last week about quarterly business reviews or strategic business reviews, and the idea was, I was asking the question like, how do you create the perfect quarterly business review, or strategic? Yeah, I mean, and because quite frankly, 10 years ago, I'd say the best MSPs were doing them. Now all MSPs are doing them. And in a lot of ways, I think there's a big gap between what I would say is like the least effective one and the most effective one. And so I think this is an area where there's a lot of improvement. And so I was asking the question about people data. Do you mind? I got 2 minutes here, a little video, a response that I thought was just
Sure.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I really want to hear candid thoughts here. So when I say people data, I mean, a lot of people might call that like performance or monitoring, or basically employee monitoring. But have you thought or considered about people data in a QBR sense? As it's data that changes all the time. It's data that's particularly useful for them to see and understand. Obviously, Zorus is engaged in doing some of this, but I want to hear what your thoughts are. Is that something that you would incorporate into a QBR?
I've had some great conversations about this. When we first became a Zorus partner, the conversation was, work from home related. People were interested, but not all of our businesses. It really actually revealed to us a cultural divide in our partnership base. We found that those are like, oh my gosh, we would never want to do that. That's against our culture. And then the other side was, I want to know exactly what people are doing, in the given day. So what happened is, to make sure that we didn't offend any culture side, we changed the narrative a little bit. We were actually talking about position utilization. So we stopped talking about the specific person, even though some of them wanted to know, I don't trust that person, I want to know exactly what they're doing. We actually wanted to go like, okay, listen, your sales department, how utilized are they? Not what is the person doing in a day, but how utilized are they in their effectiveness? Do you actually need to hire more people in that unit? Or does the software tell us that there's some performance issues in that department that you could probably address? And that was such a hook, and we got such engagement. The conversations were so visceral, like so emotionally based, that we had ownership group, like they didn't care what we were talking about anymore prior. Like they could have had the biggest conversation that we talked about half an hour about reliability or uptime, and that just disappeared when it came to this portion, and especially over the last number of years, as you can imagine. And we have a lot of businesses in our local area, they're leaving their brick and mortars left, right, and center. Like they're disappearing. They're not renewing they're not renewing their leases and stuff like that. So they head home. So this has been a big thing. So yeah, we're absolutely dumping this in as a conversational point and using some of the analytical data we have as to how performance, usually by department, not person, but.
Gotcha.
Well, that was interesting. I like the idea, people-driven conversation there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, and again, reframing it from just the negative of, what are you doing, to position utilization. How is the department doing? And how is the department, handling this IT infrastructure stack that they have? And what are they doing? And, it's not just one person, it's the company as a whole, which is at the end of the day, what management actually cares about. They don't care about necessarily just spying. They care about how is the company performing, and the IT and how you interact with the IT stack. That's a big part of that conversation. As you can see at the end, him saying like, wow, that was such an engaging part of their quarterly business review or strategic business review that he couldn't imagine doing a QBR and SBR without that.
And that's, bringing it all the way back. That's where you can show your value as an MSP. You want to be able to have that conversation, because one of the things that you're doing isn't just keeping your technology running. That's the basics. That's just cool. But if you really want to engage with them, you really want to show your value, it's how do you make them more efficient? How do you be an advisor to them of inefficiencies they may have? And you don't have to talk this from technology. You talk about from the people standpoint, because when you're running a business, this is where IT people go, let me talk about the latest widgets and gadgets we have. And they're like, yeah, the guy wanted to tell me what oil was in my trucks and I didn't really care. How much does it cost to manage my fleet? That is what they want to know. How is it going to be if I have a fleet of trucks? Cool. It's the same. It's actually a fun concept. I've talked to people about where we have a lot of transportation companies, and I'm like, if you start talking about the oil, what would you say, Mark? Because Mark's the CEO of a large transportation company. He goes, I don't care what oil goes in my trucks. I care like what does it cost to maintain my fleet? And I've reminded my staff when they, in those type of meetings we have with them as we maintain all their IT, like don't. I mean, cool. If he asks questions, feel free to answer what brand firewall you use. But I have a feeling he's not going to ask. He has several thousand employees and about 4,000 trucks. He's not worried about he's not worried about some of the finer details. He wants to think about operational efficiency. What can you do? And once you bring those type of conversations back to the people that are in charge like that, they value it because you're going, cool, how do I make my department more efficient? Is there a software or tool that we're using improperly? We're using too much, or, is there a better way to do it? And you start off on a way better foot than, well, didn't you hear about the latest widget?
Right. Because, I mean, patch management or something like that, it's something where the person that you're talking to, they have no say in it and they don't really care. Whereas if you're coming to them with data about what they're actually doing, which is managing this business, and trying to find efficiency, you're bringing data to them so that you can make a decision together. Wow, now you are, a strategic advisor as opposed to, just virtual Captain Obvious and being like, I did everything great and I updated your system. It's like, okay, but we're not solving a problem together. That's just what you did. Like, help me understand how can we make this business better together? And the, MSP, the IT person, whatever internal IT, they have data. They need to be sharing it with the business owner to solve problems together.
Yeah, thinking about from a strategic standpoint, it just brings way more value to the table. Because if I had never seen another QBR that thought someone's value was, I patched 1,000 things. Okay, was that good or bad? I don't.
That means that 1,000 things needed patching. You probably should have patched it earlier.
Yeah, like it's not actual intelligence. It's not something they're going to bring to their management. I don't know. The IT guy said he patched 1,000 things we have in this building somewhere. Like, I don't know how it changes anything, but let's move on. All right. Well, this was fun. This is great. Links down below to sign up, get started, and check out the Zorus engagement platform. It's really cool. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me. This is great.